This is a demonstration of a failure of the left wing tank pumps. You are in cruise, all the systems are operating normally.
On the engine warning display, read the title of the failure. The ECAM Fuel Left Pump 2 Low Pressure appears amber, meaning that engine feed pump 2 has failed. Note: due to the redundancy built into the system, the master caution and the single chime are not triggered, as the standby pump is now running automatically. Notice that the ECAM fuel page is automatically displayed.
Notice the corresponding indications. On the ECAM page, low boxed amber means that the pump is on, but not producing adequate pressure, and on the fuel control panel, the fault light comes on, amber, on the left 2 pump push button switch. As soon as the ECAM action has been done, the amber fault light disappears on the fuel overhead panel, and low indication is replaced by an amber cross line on the ECAM fuel page. These indications mean that the left fuel pump 2 has been manually switched off. At the end of the procedure, the status page lists you the inoperative systems. You can notice that with 1 pump out of 3 inoperative, the fuel aft transfer is inhibited, as the center tank is empty. If the other main engine feed pump also fails, the ECAM caution, left pump 1 low pressure, appears amber on the engine warning display. Note: the master caution and the single chime are not triggered, as the tank has another pump for redundancy. At the end of the procedure, the status page lists you the inoperative systems. On the engine warning display, read the title of the failure. The ECAM caution, fuel left wing pumps low pressure, appears amber, meaning that both engine feed pumps and the standby engine feed pump have failed on the left side. Once again, the ECAM fuel page is automatically displayed. Note: the related action lines will depend on the reason of this failure, if it is due to an engine feed line rupture or not. If the failure is due to an engine feed line rupture, the action line about the wing crossfeed will be "Do not open," and the gravity feed ceiling will depend on the flight time from takeoff is more or less than 30 minutes. But if it is not due to an engine feed line rupture, and after setting the wing crossfeed push button switch to on, observe that on the wing crossfeed push button switch, the white on light comes on to indicate that the valve starts to open. The crossfeed valve is shown amber during the valve transit, and the green open light comes on when the valve is fully open.
The left standby engine feed pump indications are the same as for left fuel pumps 1 and 2 shown previously. The fuel in the left tanks is only available using gravity feeding. When gravity feed from the left tank is required, for example to avoid exceeding fuel imbalance limits, apply the gravity fuel feeding procedure using your documentation. Let's now have a look at the status page.
All the left fuel pumps are inoperative. This is indicated in amber. The aft transfer is still inhibited as the center tank is empty. Note: a green fuel crossfeed memo is displayed to indicate that the crossfeed valve has been manually or automatically open. This is a demonstration of a failure of the center tank pumps. You are in cruise, all the systems are operating normally. On the engine warning display, read the title of the failure. The ECAM, fuel left center pump low pressure, appears amber, meaning that the left center pump has failed. Notice that the ECAM fuel page is automatically called, and the master caution and the single chime are not triggered, because the fuel transfer is still operating normally, as only one pump is not operative. Note: the fuel transfer will cycle independently, each inner tank condense, between 2000 kg below full level and full level. We completed the procedure for you, and you are continuing in cruise. Remember that the left center tank pump has failed. Let's see what happens if the right-hand center pump also fails.
On the engine warning display, read the title of the failure. The ECAM fuel left plus right center pumps low pressure appears amber, meaning that both center pumps have failed. Notice that the ECAM fuel page is automatically called.
We did the first action for you. Notice that the engines are fed using fuel from the inner tanks only, as the next action to do is when either inner tank content reaches 17 tons. On the status page, amber items appear in the INOP system column, as both center pumps are inoperative. With the center tank not empty, the aft fuel transfer is inhibited. Also, a green message tells you to check if the remaining FOB minus 15 tons is sufficient for the flight or for diversion.
You are continuing in cruise. Remember that both center tank pumps have failed. Let's see what happens when either inner tank quantity drops below 17 tons.
On the engine warning display, notice that the ECAM caution message is recalled. Once again, the ECAM fuel page is automatically called. The amber fault light on the center tank transfer push button switch comes on to highlight the next action, which allows to transfer fuel without risk of overflow. Notice that the ECAM symbology for the inner tank inlet valves when they are manually open. Fuel is now transferring from the center tank to the inner tanks by gravity. On gravity transfer, 15 tons of fuel in the center tank will be unusable. Note, if a forward transfer is initiated, the trim tank fuel will be directed to the inner tanks. Notice that the ECAM symbology when the center tank quantity reaches 15 tons. Also the FOB is half amber boxed to indicate that the quantity shown does not correspond to the fuel remaining for the flight. This is a demonstration of a failure of an automatic forward transfer. You are in cruise, all the systems are operating normally.
On the engine warning display, read the title of the failure. The ECAM fuel trim tank transfer fault appears amber, meaning that the automatic forward transfer has failed. Notice that the ECAM fuel page is automatically displayed.
Notice the corresponding indications. On the ECAM fuel page, the left and right forward transfer arrows are displayed amber, and on the fuel control panel, the amber fault light comes on the trim tank mode push button switch. After having manually selected the forward transfer, through the fuel panel. The left and right forward transfer amber arrows are replaced by a filled green arrow from the trim to the center tank, and the amber fault light is replaced by a white forward indication. These indications show that a manual forward transfer is in progress. Note: on the A330-200, it is not possible to do a manual forward transfer from the trim tank to the inner tanks.
You are still in cruise. The trim tank is now empty.
Notice that, when the trim tank is empty, the ECAM fuel page and the ECAM caution with the next action line are automatically recalled. Note: the trim tank isolation valve is automatically closed. After having set back the trim tank mode push button switch to auto, the transfer indications are cleared. If not, the trim tank feed selector must be set to isol in order to isolate completely the trim tank. Note: on the engine warning display, the green memo, "Trim tank transferred," is displayed, meaning that the forward transfer is completed. You are still in cruise, all systems are restored and operating normally. We are now going to study the failure of the fuel transfer from the outer to the inner tanks.
On the engine warning display, read the title of the failure. The ECAM caution, "Fuel outer to inner fault," appears amber, meaning that automatic transfer from outer tanks to inner tanks has failed. Notice that the ECAM fuel page is automatically called.
Notice the corresponding indications. On the ECAM fuel page, the outer tank transfer indication turns from a hollow green arrow to a plain amber one, meaning that the left outer to inner tank transfer has failed, and on the fuel control panel, the amber fault light comes on the outer tank transfer push button switch. We did the ECAM action for you. On the outer tank transfer push button switch, the amber fault light is replaced by the white on light, meaning that the outer to inner transfer valves are controlled open. Note: the outer tank transfer push button switch controls both transfer valves simultaneously. On the ECAM, they appear as green solid triangles. After clearing the ECAM, the green memo, "Outer tank transfer," appears on the engine warning display as a transfer from the outer to the inner tanks is in progress. When both outer tanks are emptied, as for the manual trim tank transfer, an auto recall of the ECAM caution will ask you to set back the outer tank transfer push button switch to auto.
Now let's see some abnormal indications that you can have on the ECAM fuel page. On the engine warning display, the FOB indication is displayed with 2 amber dashes across the 2 last digits in case of degraded accuracy. Click on the forward arrow to select the ECAM fuel page on the ECP to determine which tank is affected. You can see that the affected tank is the left outer tank. The 2 amber dashes indicate a loss of accuracy of the indicated fuel quantity.